What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Today we find ourselves inside the chambers of the Russian State Duma, where in theory 446 deputies and 4 vacant seats somehow should reflect the diversity of everyday life and political views across Russia. The idea of hundreds of parliamentarians figuring out their differences might sound promising, right? But if you take even the slightest glance at what actually happens, you will spot a glaring contradiction. While the country has no shortage of challenges, the current convocation of the State Duma displays a very expected level of unanimity. Occasionally you will see a few outliers, someone brave enough to vote against a new draconian measure or mumble a note of dissent under his nose like I don't agree. But you would need to observe their work very carefully to even notice such things. The moment someone steps out of the line, it is as if they are committed a transgression. And that goes right into the heart of Russia's political climate. An overwhelming uniformity framed as strength, while in reality, it stifles genuine discourse and any meaningful attempts at reform. But such things do still happen, luckily. Mostly unintentionally and accidentally. And so recently, some of the members of State Duma did indirectly confront Putin by highlighting the problems that residents of occupied Mariupol force. According to new Russian laws, these people are Russians, quote-unquote. These are the people who Putin swore to protect against Ukrainians and help them rebuild their city as soon as immediate danger is over. Mariupol has been under Russian control for more than 2 years so far. Definitely long enough to rebuild the most parts of it. What do we see in reality? People still tirelessly try to reach Putin and remind him of his promises. Just to be completely ignored and abandoned by the regime that swore to defend them against Zelensky's filthy administration. There is also another member of Russian parliament, Andrei Gurylev, very controversial person, but that's not the topic of today's video. And so he too, after his most recent visit to one of Russia's remote regions, brought to our attention the sentiment of these residents. They too feel completely neglected and forgotten by the regime of Putin. So today, let's talk about these new cases of Russian politicians bringing such dangerous for their lives topics, try to figure out why they did it, and just in general speak about the attitude of Putin towards common folk. When you think of a parliament, you might picture a lively arena of debate, where heated arguments lead to nuanced decisions. But in case of Russian State Duma, that energy is conspicuously missing. Deputies who break the script are practically invincible. Take communist Nikolai Vasilyev, for example, who once refused to endorse a new ban on the adoption of Russian children by foreign citizens. That might not sound like a radical stance, but in the Duma's ecosystem, it's a bombshell. He became the lone dissenting voice in a sea of mindless yes-sayers. Then there is another deputy, Sergei Shurgunov, who offered a remark that managed to feel downright revolutionary. He said that he hoped Russia would move toward softening morals and develop democratic principles with equality for all citizens. Sounds pretty harmless on paper, but in an institution where independent thinking is frowned upon, it lands more like a protest anthem. I'm not even kidding, the guy said something what a normal person would say, something what all governments should strive for. Like almost his exact quote, guys, let's be democratic, friendly, open-minded, and try to see the other side of each story. And the reaction of his fellow colleagues was like, yeah, So yeah, anyways. Completely ignoring him, basically. Russia still gets tiny glimmers of actual debate from time to time, like when the New People faction occasionally raises an eyebrow at some outrageous cannibal legislation. But even then, it's usually one or two individuals rather than a unified stance by the entire group as they should. These fleeting moments of defiance may not shake the foundations of power, yet they stand out precisely because they are so rare. Their uniqueness sheds a harsh light on the uniformity that otherwise reigns supreme. Government officials who swear up and down that they represent the Russian people are supposed to be the guardians of the dialogue, but as soon as actual conversation about unfavorable for Putin topics begins, they immediately shut it down. In that sense, the Duma reveals a key issue for the country, a top-down system where decisions are pre-made, and any hint of real pluralism is brushed aside as an outcast ideology. If you turn on state TV, particularly the flagship program Evening with Vladimir Solovyov, you will witness what passes for political commentary these days. Hosts and guests alike engage in a bizarre chorus of threats towards neighboring countries, talk about wiping entire cities off the map, offering inhabitants a small 2 to 3 days window to evacuate, before raining destruction without remorse. Each segment feels more extreme than the previous one, culminating in casual references to nuclear strikes or bringing city-level annihilation. Clearly and unfortunately, this brand of aggression has become normalized in certain media circles. Yet oddly enough, something unexpected popped up on this same program. The deputy Andrei Gurylev, a general from United Russia, decided to pivot from the standard script of calling for total obliteration of enemy cities and offered a glimpse into life of his native region Transbaikalia. He talked about roads made of winter asphalt that disintegrates by spring, the absence of surgeons in an entire district for 15 years, and the daily struggles of families who have no real support. This tiny detour from the mainstream war rhetoric was stunning, especially for the hosts and other guests of Solovyov's show. Instead of the usual fanfare about denazification or threats to level an entire region, here was a moment of honesty about neglected rural hospitals, failing infrastructure, and how nobody in power has lifted a finger to change this reality. Speaking about hospitals, Gurylev mentioned that for most medical procedures that are more advanced than cutting out an appendicitis, the residents sometimes have to travel 550 kilometers, approximately 340 miles, to the nearest hospital. And these are not hundreds of miles of perfect highways. Most of these roads are destroyed, or parts of them become real off-road experience. So imagine seeking urgent medical health care and then driving in a bouncing up and down car for more than 10 hours. Even more shocking was his admission that people in those remote areas cling to the bare minimum, like raising cattle, while living in archaic, half-collapsing buildings. Gurylev did not explicitly name who is at fault, but the suggestive tone was very unambiguous. I mean, who has ruled Russia for the last quarter century if not Putin? The distant corners of the country were never a priority for him. Meanwhile, on federal television, the big shots are all too busy fixating on war to address deep-rooted social decay. This dive into Transbaikalia's hardships highlight a larger pattern. Russia's so-called vertical of power is designed to project authority from the top down, but the local communities frequently get crushed under this weight. For decades, entire villages in remote regions have dwindled to just a handful of residents. Employment is almost non-existent, medical care is a luxury, and even half-decent roads are a fantasy. When entire families leave either in search of better income or to avoid forced mobilization, the population crisis only gets worse. And remember that after the original Russian military was destroyed during the initial attacks against Ukraine, it was precisely such regions from where Putin was mainly drafting new volunteers. So no wonder some of these small towns and villages are almost abandoned now, or living their last decades before moving somewhere else completely. Communities that existed and bonded there for generations are now completely not there. Here is the irony. All that talk about developing the motherland rarely includes the motherland's actual needs. The official line brags about being an energy superpower, about modernizing cities, or about reconstructing liberated territories in Ukraine. Yet many rural districts in Russia itself have been completely forgotten. These are not war-torn zones. There have not been active hostilities in Transbaikalia since the border conflicts with Imperial Japan in the 1930s. The destruction there is of a different kind. It's neglect born of indifferent governance. While some might try to pin the blame on liberals, the truth is that we've had the same leadership core for over 25 years. There is no big rotation, no wave of new ideas, no accountability that forces the government to improve essential services. And so the same pattern repeats. War talk saturates the media, while real domestic failures unfold quietly, far from the spotlight. It is actually ridiculous for propaganda to blame anyone else for these flaws beside the regime itself. I mean, seriously, think about it. For the last 2 decades, it was Putin, his cronies, and his appointees that helped develop modern Russia. Why would they ever blame Europeans, Americans, the absence of family values, or LGBT communities, for example, for this? Yet somehow they do. It is the same thing if you study in school and keep failing your exams, because you either play video games or spend time with your friends instead of studying. Who is here to blame? Your friends, your parents, or maybe it is you? If you think the ecosystem might at least show compassion for those it has liberated, Mariupol tells a very different story. Once a vibrant coastal city, it became a battleground and ended up in complete ruins. The Russian government's grand promise to immediately rebuild the city after Ukrainians are pushed out and offer new homes to displaced residents is now completely empty. People who lost their apartments are being told they can either take out a mortgage on freshly constructed units they can barely afford, or move into shacks in the suburbs. What's the difference between other people who lost their homes in other regions? Oh, so you don't have a home because it was destroyed during our liberation, the Russian officials say. Well, that's too bad, sorry about it. Well, if you want to have a roof over your head, just buy a new house. It's that simple. Mariupol residents who already hate Russian presence must be furious after experiencing attitude like this. Footage is circulated of local residents recording pleas for help, declaring that these new apartments were supposedly promised to them free of charge. And meanwhile, the city's main steel factory, Azovstal, remains destroyed beyond any reconstruction. It leaves thousands without jobs and the entire economy in shambles. This is another thing, by the way. This factory was one of the biggest, if not the biggest employer of Mariupol. Thousands of people work there, and tens of thousands depended on the results of their work. And now, it simply no longer exists. But people are still there. The aesthetic of new buildings is also very questionable. Instead of preserving any semblance of the city's original character, saving century-old historic buildings, new constructions mimic a cheap motel style, slapped together so rapidly that cracks are already forming in the walls. That's even before the residents had a chance to move in. So imagine the condition 5-10 years from now. And while local leaders like Denis Pushilin collect reports and appear to promise assurances, the reality has not changed. People are stuck in bureaucratic loopholes, forced to write letter after letter to officials who were installed from above, not chosen by the community. This is the same vertical of power in action. It imposes big decisions, claims victories and progress, and leaves real people stuck in unlivable conditions. Those hammered by war are supposed to settle for hollow promises and the occasional media stunt about how everything is getting better. But in reality, it's only getting worse. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. For example, my Patreon, where you can see these episodes in very early access and hundreds of uncensored footage from Ukraine every single day. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are resolve they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe